Hello, my name is Angelica Salvi. I work at UCD, where I lead the work on the ethical implications of AI in the workplace. Today, I would like to present the main finding of our work on this topic based on a recent report that we just published. So let me start by saying that comparable evidence on the use of AI systems in the workplace is still scant, and UCD is doing a lot of work on this right now. In the meanwhile, the evidence we found suggested the use of AI in the workplace is growing. For example, the 2019 Gartner surveys found that 17% of the organizations use AI solution in their HR function. The literature finds that many benefits arise from the use of AI in the workplace. It can complement and augment human capabilities. It increases productivity and the demand for human labor in certain jobs. It can also improve worker safety and reduce the amount of tedious tasks that workers need to do at work. But there are also a number of risks, including ethical concerns that arise when AI is used in the workplace. As shown in this slide, a BC Gamma survey finds that 65% of workers fear that AI might dehumanize their work, and 64% of them fear that AI will pose problems in terms of protection of their personal data. To look into what are the main ethical risks when we want to make the use of AI trustworthy, we've identified four main core dimensions of trustworthiness of AI in the workplace. First, human rights, which include privacy, fairness, agency, and dignity. Second, transparency and explainability. Third, robustness, security, and safety. And fourth, accountability. I will go into a bit more detail for each one of these, but first let me say that these dimensions of trustworthiness are based on the OECD principles for responsible stewardship of trustworthy AI, to which more than 40 countries have adhered since its adoption in 2019. So if we start with the first dimension of trustworthiness, human rights, this includes privacy, fairness, and agency. The deployment of predictive models and the processing of unstructured and richer data has transformed the nature of workers' monitoring, posing risks for their privacy. The use of remote surveillance software has increased exponentially during the COVID crisis, when telework became much more common. There is software that captures frequent live photos of workers from the laptop, and some companies have been found to monitor workers' activity also on social media or their location outside working hours to discourage collective action. The second risk that we see for human rights is a possible loss of autonomy. Systematic management through AI systems can reduce the ability of workers to decide on how to do certain tasks that are assigned to them and their agency in them. And so ultimately, this will reduce their creativity and innovation, besides making them feel less worthy. For example, when using AI for medical diagnosis, doctors are often face pressure to follow the advice of the system. Instances of bias and discrimination in AI systems have been also widely reported. In principle, using AI to formalize rules for management processes make decision more objective and therefore would reduce discrimination. But in fact, AI systems struggle with bias. There is bias in who can see job postings, bias in how algorithms rank job applicants, and bias in facial recognition systems that are used to authenticate workers or even to assess the performance in some interviews. Bias can happen both at the data level or at the input level due to historical data that are biased or non-representative samples or incomplete and outdated data. And there is also bias at the system level through the choices that are made when AI systems are designed. Overall, compared to biases in human-led decisions, biased AI systems are likely to systematize existing biases. So this is the real risk that the same bias is applied over and over and is therefore reinforced in the labor market. The second core dimension of trustworthiness resolves around transparency and explainability. Workers are not always aware they're being hired, monitored, or managed by AI. And job applicants, for example, are not necessarily informed that their application material is being screened by algorithms. In the US, some employees who refuse to take part in AI-led wellness programs in their workplace have faced termination of their employer-provided health insurance. And even if employers are supposed to obtain employees' consent for the use of their personal data, it can be very difficult for workers to deny such consent. The second dimension I want to mention is explainability. The outcomes of many AI systems are very difficult to explain, especially for off-the-shelf AI systems, which offer less control over the design, development, and application of the system itself. Explainability does not mean giving an explanation of the full AI decision-making process, but rather being able to give interpretable information about the determinant factors that led to a certain recommendation or decision. The lack of explainability also hinders the ability to challenge an outcome for workers. This especially is true for platform workers who were not able sometimes to obtain explanations on how deliveries were assigned to some of them and why some of them were removed from the platform itself. Moving to the third dimension of trustworthiness, we look at robustness and safety. There are multiple examples of AI that help keep workers safe, but AI can also lead to excessive work intensification, as reported in some warehouses, or can expose to more severe consequences when there is a breach of data. Looking finally at accountability, it is difficult to decide who is legally responsible if something goes wrong when AI systems are used in the workplace. Is it the programmers? Is it the developers or the employers? In the workplace, if developers and designers are not involved, most responsibility will shift to employers. Approaches to improve accountability in the workplace include doing audits and having a human in the loop to approve decisions or predictions made by AI systems before they're actually implemented. So our work then looks at the policy response that countries have been using, and we find that the policies are actually span across a broad range of tools, from self and co-regulation to the application of existing policies and regulation to the development of new AI-specific policies. Let's start with existing legislation. This is legislation that, while not being AI-specific, is relevant to us when AI systems are used in the workplace. The first example I mentioned is anti-discrimination laws. These laws are applicable to hiring through AI systems. The emerging evidence is that even if the existing legal framework is strong, enforcing it when AI systems are used can be challenging, especially if attempts to redress need to be initiated by the worker or individual applicants. Secondly, I want to mention data protection legislation. In Europe, the GDPR, for example, enshrines rights such as the right to transparent information, the right of access, or the right to rectification, which can address some of the concerns I mentioned above. And finally, among relevant existing legislation, let me mention consumer protection legislation, which is also being used. This happened, for example, when employers who bought AI hiring systems that were marketed as objective, or actually more objective than humans, appear to instead produce more discriminatory outcomes. The second big category of relevant policies is whole of government policy efforts have implications for use of AI in the workplace. One of the most discussed at the moment is the UI Act, which proposes a regulation based on categorization of risks, which range from minimal to unacceptable. Some of the workplace systems may have elements of unacceptable risk and would therefore be banned, but generally AI systems used in the workplace would be considered high risk. And so they would be subjected to data protection, transparency, and human oversight, among other things. We also have on our radar the US Algorithmic Accountability Act, which would introduce mandatory impact assessment for these tools. But the bill has not made significant progress since being presented in 2019. Since we published the paper, relevant policies are also being released in Canada and are being developed in the UK. The third and final category of policies that are those that are specific to the use of AI systems in the workplace. These are still quite rare, but we have a number of interesting cases. In Illinois, for example, workers need to inform candidates about the use of AI system in interviews for recruitment. And Maryland bans the use of facial recognition in interviews for employment without consent. New York City Council is banning automated employment decision tools without annual bias audits. And in Spain, thanks to legislation linked to a collective bargaining agreement, platforms have to provide workers' representatives with information on the algorithmic formula used to determine working conditions. Overall, these policies are very important developments, but they also show the need for better enforcement. For example, the Illinois law is unclear on what kind of explanation need to be given to candidates, or what happens if a candidate refuses to be analyzed in this way. And the New York City Council law leaves potential for vendor-sponsored audits to rubber stamp their own technologies. Overall, I would conclude by saying that we see a strong need for policy and guidance to ensure trustworthy AI in the workplace. There are many opportunities that AI can bring if we address these risks and make AI trustworthy. So with this, I will end. Let me thank you very much for your attention. Please do look our work up on our website, and especially the forthcoming OECD International Conference that we will have on this topic in March 2023. Thank you very much.